There we go. Yes.
Okay, excellent. So Incorrigibles grew out of a project called the Prison Public Memory Project that was started back in 2011. And the Prison Public Memory Project was started because Governor Cuomo in New York in 2011 said because the prison population was going down and economically it didn't make sense to have so many prisons open, he was just going to close them. And politically, there had been so many people that had been avoiding that because of the backlash that very often communities give, because there's this idea sometimes that prisons are economic generators for communities. And so at the time, having worked around prison issues for so long, I was working with a woman named Tracy Hewling, and we decided that it would be really important to work with communities that had prisons in them that might close, to help them understand how the prison got there in the first place, and to kind of create workshops and things so people could imagine something else for their community that might be more healthy, that they could choose to bring in. And so that was the impetus for that project. We started working in Hudson, New York, because there's a prison there now. It's called Hudson Correctional Facility. It has, Hudson Correctional is primarily a medium security men's prison, although there's some youth back in there now. But Hudson, it seemed like a prison that could close and could easily be transformable into something else. And so we decided to kind of use that as a pilot site to start looking, just researching in. Turns out, and I will, and that the Hudson Correctional opened as the Women's House of Refuge in the late 1800s and became the New York State Training School for girls in 1905 to 1975. So, Kathleen, maybe you want to talk a little bit about the history of the facility, and then I can talk about kind of how this project kind of grew out of that history.
Let's see, hang on. Go ahead.
The background of this prison history that we've been dealing with in the Incorrigibles Project is that in the late 19th century, there were a lot of women reformers, kind of the first wave of what was called the New Woman. And they were interested in making society better in lots of ways. And one of them was they were upset that the prisons were mixing youth and women all together. And so they decided to separate women off and treat them differently. So they actually, in New York, they established women's courts. One of them was famously downtown in the Village, what was near Washington Square. And it's in an old, it had a courthouse and a prison connected to it. And this was a special women's court. Then out of that seemed to flow more of a concern for young people who were having brushes with the law of one sort or another. And so reformers like Josephine Shaw Lowell, who was the first female head actually of the Board of Charities of New York, was one of the people who was behind the founding of the Hudson Institute and the House of Refuge, actually, which is what it was at first. And as the time went on, there were lots of different theories about how you could rehabilitate young people and how it was a bad idea to put them in prison with people who were older criminals, because all they would learn in the school of the prison was to become a criminal. So the Hudson Girls Training School then, like many of these institutions which were founded around the same time, focused on the idea that you could save children, that you could make them better, and that they could be rehabilitated. So the word training school is often found in these institutions across the U.S. There were training schools in Massachusetts and along the East Coast and other places. And what our project, as we began to look into this, one of the reasons our project is called Incorrigibles is that we discovered that this was a term that was a label, really, that was put on young girls between the ages of 13 and 18. That was the age that were confined at the Hudson Girls Training School. And it was a label that was put on them that has a strange resonance if you think that these prison movements were trying to reform things and trying to rehabilitate people. Because the word incorrigible, of course, means you can't be corrected. So to call someone incorrigible and put them in a place that's supposedly going to train them and rehabilitate them seems almost like a contradiction in terms. And so exploring some of those contradictions is what our project is about. But let me switch back to Alison now, because that's the early history of the institution. And she's got some documents up that'll show you something about what we've learned from fragments, not from big databases or anything, about how girls were put there, what they were put there for, and how they were seen, labeled, categorized, and so on. So Alison?
Thank you, Kathleen. So the picture that I have up here is actually a photograph of a box of documents that was found at a yard sale in Hudson, New York, by a thrift shop owner who goes around to various yard sales to collect things to sell in her shop. And for some reason, there was a box of documents. She bought them for $5. There were about 150 documents, all looking like this. There's also photographs, which we'll get into, all related to the New York State Training School for Girls in the 1920s and 30s. So there's intake forms, there's letters home, there's photographs, there's physician certificates of examination, there's news clippings. And so this box is what really, really kind of moved the project from the prison public memory to Incorrigibles, because what happened is as I began to look through the box and put together people's stories based on the names of the girls in the box, it became really clear that many of the girls had been sent to this institution because they were physically abused or sexually abused. And rather than the perpetrators of abuse being sent away, it was the girls that were kind of sent to keep them quiet or to for some other reason, or because maybe they were acting out like girls still do today, like running away, or because in response to the things that they were suffering. So
I might add, Alison,
yes.
that these girls, one of the reasons that they were sent away, people who were victims of some kind of abuse, was the idea that childhood was a period that was somehow innocent, a concept of the 20th century that perhaps hasn't disappeared. And that if these girls who'd been sexually abused, they now had knowledge of sex and that they were tainted. And if they were allowed to stay in their homes or be in schools around other young girls, that they would somehow pollute them. So the fact that they had been sexually abused ended up being a taint and a smear on their own reputation. And thus the idea was that they would be sent away upriver where they couldn't be around anybody else to spoil other girls with their premature sexual knowledge.
Right, and there's one case actually that where there's documents in the box that kind of track this story. There's a young woman who was sold by her mother and a stepfather to a boarder. They were running a boarding house at age 12, this young girl, Gladys. And Gladys was, so she was sold off to be married. This was found out. The parents were arrested and sent to prison. Gladys was sent to an orphanage because she didn't have, her parents were not there. And she would talk to the other kids in the orphanage about being married, having sex. And they basically, there's documentation that she was going to affect the morals of the other children, and so she had to be removed. So she was sent from the orphanage to the New York State Training School for Girls. So training school is a euphemism really for a young women's prison, and so New York State had one of these, and which closed in '75. almost every state in the country has a state-run institution like this. Some have only closed, like in New Jersey, theirs closed, I think, a year or two ago. You know, they seem like really things from the past, but they're still around. This is a drone photograph of the institution recently. Just so, because I actually tried to get permission. I had gotten permission to take photographs on the grounds at one point. And then when I asked to go back to take more photographs, they said no. So I worked with these two guys who had a drone, and we kind of went around the perimeter of the institution to be able to document some of the buildings. So this is Hudson Correctional Medium Security Men's Prison. I actually haven't been able to get into any of these buildings to understand kind of how they're set up today, how they transformed from the Women's House of Refuge. And just so you, these are called cottages, and the Women's House of Refuge was set up as in a cottage system which came over from England, which was a system specifically set up for women who were thought to do better in kind of recreating family settings in communities. So this is a photograph of the institution back in the 1910s, I think. So I'm just going to run through these quickly. On the prison grounds, there is a house called the Bronson House. It's an architecturally notable house that there's a group called Historic Hudson has been working on renovating. It's open twice a year for architects and other people to do house tours, and so I had asked if we could install an exhibition and have conversations about the past and present of young women's incarceration with some of the documents from the box, and so we were able to do that. So these are just some of the photographs of the photographs of girls whose images were in the box. Unclear who the photographer was that was taking pictures of these girls at the institution. And then the other documents in the box were kind of recreated and strewn around the floor, kind of in the same way that the lives of these girls have been almost left to the dust of history, but the girls themselves were printed larger than life and brought into the room of this mansion, which they may have had to work in, or it was also used sometimes to do overflow classrooms. This is Dazzle. She's one of my favorite girls. She's very spunky. She writes on the back of these photographs. So one of the first juvenile courts was established in Chicago, where they really decided that children should be thought about separately than adults. And so I just include this as a definition of what they came up with at the first juvenile court of Chicago. And again, you know, it starts with somebody who's incorrigible, or who knowingly associates with thieves, vicious or immoral person, or who's growing up in idleness or crime, or who knowingly frequents a house of ill fame. This Kathleen mentioned the definition of incorrigible. You know, it's still being used in New York, which is so interesting because it's such an old-fashioned term. It's still a subcategory of persons in need of supervision.
And one of the things that has persisted in our engagement with these historical materials is to notice how stigmatizing labels are used for young girls to this very day, and that this process of labeling young people has meant a tremendous drop in self-esteem and led to lots of other kinds of troubles. And the way in which many girls have internalized these labels and have struggled through their lives to fight back against the way they were stigmatized as somehow people who could not be saved. They were marginalized by the categories that they were put into.
Right, and one of the really getting a better understanding of these documents and kind of getting a glimpse into the lives of these girls that were sent to this institution, I really began to wonder what's changed and not in youth justice for girls, because it seems like there's so many things that I was reading about that were not that different than some of the experiences of girls, you know, today. And in the 20s and 30s, just to give you a little background, most of the girls that were there were from poor immigrant families, and like German, Irish, Italian, and they were girls very often that wanted to, you know, very often conservative families. They wanted to date, they wanted to go to the dance halls, they wanted to work in the factories, and that wasn't okay. About maybe 20% of girls in the 20s and 30s, maybe at the most 20% were Black. And by the time the institution closed in 1975, it was predominantly, the girls that were there were predominantly Black. So it shifted over time. So I'm just going to introduce you to some of the girls who were in the box in some of the stories, just briefly some of the backgrounds of some of these girls. So this is Jewell Ward. Jewell there was a photograph of her with an unidentified girl. She was at the institution in 1921. She was listed as a disorderly child. She had been born in Texas. Her family moved to New York. She was at the institution for a couple of years, and what they would do when the girls were ready to leave, they usually were there for 2 years, but sometimes longer. They were generally not there past 18. They would do home visits, and the girls would either go home, or if home wasn't an unsafe place to go to, they would be paroled to a job as a maid or a mother's helper or something like that. Lila Thomas had the most documents in the box. This is Lila with a photograph that I believe she sent back to the institution after she had gotten married. When the girls got married, she had been paroled to 2 jobs, and then had gotten married. But what happened during the parole period, the girls would have to write back to the institution every month with a letter kind of talking about how they were doing, what they had done, and then showing how much money they made and how they spent it. So they would be in accounting. So there's a letter that Lila wrote back saying, "I'm married now, I have a little bank account, will you allow me access to it?" And apparently, you know, once she was married, she was now didn't have to report back to the institution because she could be overseen by her husband. So this is Lila's warrant of commitment, and so her offense was being incorrigible. So what was also in the box in relation to the intake forms of the girls, there were these medical reports where there was a lot of almost kind of phrenology still being used, but kind of what their facial features looked like, and also they were doing very invasive gynecological examinations on the girls. But also this mouth somewhat sensuous. I mean, it's like, it's
what we discovered in looking at, as I said, rather fragmentary set of records here, is that the people who are examining them seem to be pretty obsessed with their sexuality. So even girls who were brought in for things that didn't have to do with either being abused or with having found their own sexuality, they would be investigated. It seems that systematically the girls were examined in order to determine whether they were virgins or not, and they were examined for VD. This was particularly in the early period of the 20th century. VD was a big concern, and the draconian measures that were sometimes enforced to help keep it from spreading were ones that were largely practiced on young women, not on young men. The idea was around World War I, we need to protect the soldiers. So there was actually a big period of lockup of girls who were suspected of having VD but had never been charged with anything. So these examinations then partake of this particular trend in American society at the time to be very worried and spend a lot of time and attention on what was the girls' sexual activity and whether they were disease carriers and so on.
So Cecil, LaVinnia, Partridge was not in the box. What happened is we started putting up some of the research and some of the documents that were in the box, and kind of show, and along with additional research, and now with Ancestry.com and various other research tools that families have to do their family trees, people were realizing that they had mothers and grandmothers and great aunts who had been at this institution called the New York State Training School for Girls, and they would Google it to find out what it was. And then they would come and they'd find, you know, information on the site, and they would write in and want to share their story or to get more information. So Marie, Cecil's mother, wrote in because Marie's mother, Cecil, had passed away, but Marie had remembered her mother talking about being pregnant at the institution, and she wanted to know if there might be a sibling someplace that she could find. So we looked into the historical records that we could find. Some of the documents that I've shown, like these records of commitment, these pages, were not in the box. These are from the New York State Archives, and they are where they have most of the documentation from the institution was thrown away, like many other institutions. People just consider it kind of useless. But they do have at the New York State Archives these intake books, which include almost every girl that went through the institution, and you know, what they were in for, where they were from, and you know, their religion, their race, various other things like that. So at one point, I was able to go in and I tried to find the entries for the girls that were in the box to have a better understanding. You know, besides, because in some cases they didn't have very much information, and so Marie had sent a photograph of her mother, Cecil, here, who's at the institution with her ukulele. And I was able to find her intake as a delinquent child in 1927. Marie also, part of what's grown out of this, as people have written in and asked for information and also wanted to share information, been doing oral history interviews with people to kind of create this archive of people's experiences, because young women that who are alive today, who maybe were at the institution in the 60s and 70s, can talk about their own, you know, what was happening in their lives before they got to the institution, what was happening there, and what's happened since. And then there's other relatives who want to talk about the stories, or else the silences about a relative's incarceration at the institution. And so we've been compiling those. And on the website, I can send you links afterwards, Lori, to some of the oral histories. If we have time, I'll play one today. So Linda Odell was also at the institution. And
I might add that what Alison has been talking about of the spread of this project to document people who are descendants of girls who were at the Hudson Girls Training School. This has led us to understand the way in which the history is not just something sitting there in that box that was discovered in a thrift shop. It's something that can connect to things that people are interested in and learning about today. Likewise, the preoccupation with girl sexuality is something that's very characteristic of girls who are having brushes with the criminal justice system today. And in several conferences that we've participated in, the work that we've been doing with these historical documents and these old stories have eerie resonance with what's going on today in the justice system and the way in which girls are struggling with their self-image and claiming their self-image back from the negative categories used.
thank you. And just to go back to Marie's story with her mother, we weren't able to find any other information than the intake book at the New York State Archives for Marie. But she continued to do her own archival research using Ancestry and other things. And what she thinks happened, and just so you, what we've been able to understand in terms of when girls were pregnant when they went to the institution, it was over the 75 years that the institution was open, there were different ways that they decided to have the girls deal with their pregnancy. In some cases, I understand that the girls were allowed to keep their babies for 2 years, and in other cases they were taken right away, either sent to an orphanage or sent to a family member. What Marie thinks is that around the time that her mother would have given birth, there is a cousin who adopted a boy, and so she thinks that that is actually her brother. But she can't be sure of it. Another thing that we've done is we've kind of reverse engineered ancestry.com because the census, the censuses federal and state are public up to around 1945. And so what we were able to do is find the training school has in the census, you have all the girls that were there were listed as inmates, and you even have baby inmates. Like there's an inmate that's 0.5 years old. And so what we've been able to do is create spreadsheets of all of the names of the girls who were there in the years that we have had access to the census data. So we have about 2,000 names. So sometimes when people have written in or want more information, we can kind of go through and see if we have any information either from the intake books or from the census data. And we've put up on ancestry.com a family tree of the institution. And originally I was gonna make the tree, the institution was like the mother and all of the girls were daughters. And one of the genealogists at Ancestry said, you can't do that, you're gonna break the whole system. But apparently there was some Native Americans who wanted to kind of track the non-biological relationships of people in their tribe, and so they'd come up with a way to kind of create an image and connect people directly to the image. So the genealogist kind of showed us how to do that. So some people now have been coming through Ancestry because I don't know if you use Ancestry, but basically if the name of if there's information about a family member that is on Ancestry, there'll be a little leaf that comes up on the tree, a little leaf by the person's name on your tree, and you can click on it, and then it'll bring you to information about the Incorrigibles Project. So you can kind of share information, or we can share information with you if you if we have anything. It's kind of a way to gather more stories and to kind of build the community. There's one woman who reached out whose great grandmother was at the institution, and she's the person that we've been able to hear from, kind of who was there the furthest back in 1910. And And Anne talks about how the generational impact of a woman's incarceration, and how there's been kind of institutionalization throughout the generations in her family, which she thinks is related to that. Oh, I just want, so the violation of Section 486 that Linda was in for is it's part of the Penal Law of 1909. It means an ungovernable child, improper guardianship, disorderly, incorrigible, or begging. So in research, we found the most famous person who was sent to this institution was the jazz singer Ella Fitzgerald. Her information was not in the box. There's a woman named, a really wonderful writer, Nina Bernstein, that was writing a book called The Lost Children of Wilder, which is a great book about the history of the foster care system in New York. And in her research for that book, Nina found that Ella had been there based on a conversation with one of the women that had worked at the institution, who's since passed away. So these images are from the Library of Congress, which I just included for Ella. But I was able to find her record of commitment at the New York State Archives. So she was sent there in 1933 for being ungovernable and will not obey the just and lawful commands of her mother, a judged delinquent. What's interesting is I've spoken to Ella's biographer, and as well as a woman who's doing the biography of Chick Webb, whose band Ella became part of. Apparently in 1933, Ella's mother was no longer alive. She was living with her aunt and uncle, and from what I understand, Ella was running away from home because she was being abused in the family, and so here she is at 15 being sent away to the institution. Many of the girls would run away. Very often they would be brought back. Unclear. We think that Ella ran away and was not caught, and it was after that she joined Chick Webb's band.
The story goes, and we're not positive of all these details, is that she was actually, when she was released from the institution, she was released to the custody of Chick Webb, which of course I find very amusing since they did not recognize her talent there. African-American girls were in segregated cottages at the time Ella Fitzgerald was there. And the residents of this training school were brought to church. There's a big church up the hill from that magnificent estate on the Hudson that Alison showed you in the photographs. And they were brought to church on Sunday. Ella was not allowed to sing in the church choir there because she was of the wrong race, according to the church. So, so she's released to a band member, a parole that many a girl might have wished for.
Although when I've talked to Chick Webb's biographer, she thinks that she wasn't released to him, that she was back in New York, and that there was a competition where people could come and dance and sing, and she was seen there, but it wasn't an easy path for her to become part of the band. Some people think that there's the story where she came out and she was found and it was all kind of rosy from there, but apparently she struggled quite a bit. But it's so interesting kind of piecing these stories together, even with somebody as famous as Ella Fitzgerald. So Ella apparently was invited back to the institution in the early 70s, before it closed, by the superintendent/warden at the time. And she wanted nothing to do with it. She didn't want people to know she was there. She had been put in solitary confinement. She had been treated horribly, and she refused to go back to the institution. Kathleen was mentioning that at the time Ella was there, they were segregating Black girls into 2 of the cottages. This is a quote unquote map. It's called a sociometric geography of a community. There was a man named Jewell Moreno was brought into the institution in the 30s to because girls were running away, and his background was in theater and in sociometry and psychology, and so his idea was that he began to map out relationships of every girl in the institution to one another, because he thought if girls were living with people they liked, they would be much less likely to run away. So what you can see is each of these larger circles is one of those cottages that you saw in that, in the drone shot as well as in the postcard. And each circle within is one of the girls, and there's initials inside each one. I looked for Ella Fitzgerald. I don't think she was there when the map was done, unless they were using different initials. What you can see is over on the left, those are the cottages where the Black girls were being segregated, and you can see there's fewer lines going from those cottages to the rest of the institution. There's a colleague that shared some research. He was writing a book called Black Child Savers along the Hudson, and in his research found, at the Library of Congress, found information related to the New York State Training School, which he shared. There was an African-American doctor who in the 30s, his wife had heard a radio program talking about this institution where Black girls were being not treated as well, and so he and his wife had a yacht, and which that they would take up and down the Hudson sometimes, and he asked one weekend to pull the yacht over in Hudson, requested a tour from the superintendent, and saw that the Black girls' cottages were so much worse off than the white girls' cottages, and that they were having to do the more of the laundry and cleaning and things like that. So he wrote a letter to the governor at the time, saying, you helped me with something that I brought to your attention once before. I'd like to bring this to your attention. And then you can see that about a year later, there's the NAACP does a class action lawsuit against the institution, and then a year after that, they're told to stop the segregation as possible. So there's all kinds of documents related to that which are not part of here. I'm not gonna play Liz's story right now unless you think it's a good idea, because I don't even know where we are with time. I want people to be able to.
I'm gonna have to leave very shortly.
Okay.
I just wanted to mention before I say goodbye and good luck on the second half of this with more fascinating materials connecting us to present day stories coming up. The class action lawsuit that Alison just mentioned had an effect on the courts across New York State, as well as the institutions like Hudson. So the foster care system, which was placing girls out and which was responsible when it couldn't place girls out, was the one who was actually placing girls sending them to the Hudson. They stopped doing this, and it was under Fiorello LaGuardia that there was an order that was issued that we discovered recently at the Municipal Archives when doing a show there. There was an order issued under the LaGuardia administration to say that they would not, the state and the courts would no longer work with anyone in foster care placements who were placing girls in segregated facilities or placing girls of African-American descent in the Hudson Girls Training School instead of in families or in religious institutions. So, there was a marker there at mid-century where suddenly policy changes. Although if you look at the Nina Bernstein book on the foster care system in the courts, you realize that this practice actually did not change just because the law changed. So bye-bye.
Bye, Kathleen, thank you. So what we'll go back to Liz's story if we have time. I wanted to, Nina Bernstein in her book mentions that So it's called The Lost Children of Wilder. Shirley Wilder is who the book is about. Shirley Wilder was a plaintiff against the foster care system in New York in a case that went on for many, many, many years. In the book, in her interviewing Shirley Wilder, Nina Bernstein talked to Shirley about how she had run away. So Shirley was at the New York State Training School for Girls as one of the places she was sent. Apparently, Shirley ran away from the institution, and she tells a story about when she ran away with another girl, how scary it was that it's nighttime and they stumble upon this graveyard on their way toward the water. And so, and how apparently some of the house mothers, because the way the cottages were set up, the girls were there and there was house mothers and house fathers that were kind of overseeing them. But apparently some of the house mothers would say, yeah, that's what happens to you, when you run away, or if you act out, like you end up in the cemetery. So I asked the superintendent if I could go and photograph the cemetery. And so I was able to do that. And at some point it would be amazing to be able to go back and work with people that are at the institution now to do some upkeep. I mean, it's really kind of been left in complete disarray. There's graves there of little babies who died at the institution, as well as some of the women that were there. I spoke to Nina Bernstein. I think that most of the burials are from when it was the Women's House of Refuge, when women were there with babies. I couldn't, and I've tried to research some of the names that are still kind of readable on the tombstones, like Mary O'Brien. This is Ada Swartwood. And this is an image of the kind of the graveyard as it is. Some of the tombstones have fallen over, and some of them are really tiny. I also found this postcard that was on eBay, but I ended up creating a little installation around the cemetery images because somebody is writing this. It was sent in 1923. They sent it to somebody in Albany. It's somebody named Bert, I think Bertie. She says, "I'm in the cemetery writing this. I have the blues." And then this is the front of the card that she sent. So part of the thing that's driven me to do this project is to make sure that these girls aren't forgotten. I mean, that was what was so striking about the images in the box and all these documents in the box. And if that box hadn't been found and bought by this the thrift shop owner, nobody would have known about those girls' lives. And it's so important to kind of make sure that their stories are told, and actually we understand how they connect with the stories of girls today, so we can understand what's changed and not, and what really needs to change, because there's so much that hasn't. Another aspect of the project, and I'm going to ask if anyone has a question, please feel free to interrupt if there's something that we don't have to necessarily wait till the end if there's something that you want clarified, because there's so much to this that sometimes it may not be completely as clear as you might want it. But as Kathleen mentioned, language, the term incorrigible, ungovernable, all those words that were kind of used as labels to kind of define and then confine young women is such an important part of the project. So been also doing research pulled out of these archival documents of words that were used, were applied to girls. And Google has, there's an Ngram facility where you can research words, and it will show you the use of the words from 1800 to the present, like the popularity of the word. So So I took the words that were most prevalent in some of the archival documents, as well as words that are used today, like oppositional defiant disorder. The two defiant at the top is listed in the DSM, and that very often is used today as, you know, as the stamp of incorrigible, you know, for girls, boys too sometimes, but very often girls. So I actually was introduced to this amazing woman, Diana Weimar, who is an embroidery artist. And I had been collecting the engrams and doing these layerings of words over time and trying to figure out kind of how they should be presented, whether it should be a video or a graphic, or, and then I was reading about how the girls were trained in embroidery and handcrafts. The training that they did, there was some education and, you know, reading, writing, and arithmetic, but a lot of it was home economics, furniture fixing, embroidery, cooking, cleaning, things like that. So I was reading about how the girls were being trained in embroidery, and they would do their samplers, and I kept thinking about how when language is applied again and again and again, it's like a training that is it attempts to define somebody, and the repetition of that is what almost perfects it. So this was so I decided that I asked Diana if she would if we could work together, and she would do the embroidery of the use of language over time in the same way. So this is called the language sampler. Soiled dove is a really bizarre and interesting word. I mean, soiled dove, somebody was asking me about it, and I didn't really know, I didn't know the true history of it, which she shared with me. So the soiled dove term was a legal plea used in the early 1900s. There was a lawyer who was defending a sex worker, and basically said that she couldn't be prosecuted for what she had done because she was a soiled dove, and that she had been taken advantage of, and so there was a soiled dove plea that was used to kind of get her off. Why in 1990 soiled dove became a very popular word in relation to its previous history, I don't know if it was a band or if it was something else, but anyway, that was this is just images of other kind of language that's been pulled out of various documents. A lot of it relates to like the tests for sexual diseases and things like that. Marie, Cecil's mother, shared with me, her mother had a copy of this that she had kept from the institution in the 1920s, the Code of Morals. So this was a little pamphlet that was in each of the girls' rooms about how they were a good American controls themselves. This was written in the, I believe in the 1800s by this professor. There was a competition for people to actually, yeah, this is here, there was a contest, and Professor William Hutchins won. I guess it was in 1916. It was sponsored by the National Institution for Moral Instruction. These are just more kind of examples of just research in relation to language and diagrams. I've been helping people with write Freedom of Information Act letters, and or just putting them in touch with the state archives to get their relatives' information. Sometimes they're able to, sometimes they aren't. As I mentioned, in New York, PINs, persons in need of supervision, incorrigible is still a subcategory of PINs. And you know, it wasn't until I've been working on this project for a while till I saw that. I just assumed that it was such an antiquated term that it wasn't being used anymore. And there's an amazing researcher, Shabnam Javdani, who works at NYU, who runs a program called Roses with Young Women Today, and has been doing a lot of research on why girls are incarcerated or what their offense is, and about in a county upstate, about 75% of the girls are incorrigible today. And I include this because the Girls for Gender Equity is a national organization. They're based here in Brooklyn. They are, what they were doing in this legislative session was asking or demanding the legislature to remove this word incorrigibles from hymns, because it's overwhelmingly applied to Black and brown girls, and it's also the whole idea that it means incapable of being corrected or amended. And because of neuroscience now and the neuroplasticity of the brain, it's completely it's been kind of shown that their incorrigibility is not something that is that is even relevant to young people. So I just have a few images here of how some of this research has been interpreted into a traveling exhibition, which is currently up at the New York City Municipal Archives, but nobody can see it. It was at the Brooklyn Federal Courthouse. They have a gallery there called the Charles P. Sifton Gallery, and it's supposed to be traveling to Newburgh, New York, if we can find a venue for it there. And whenever the exhibition is installed, there's always public programs around it. So we do conversations about youth justice for girls then and now, and so it's really kind of the launching pad for a larger conversation. So this, you can see, is the language sampler wall hanging tapestry. These are some of the photographs of the girls. This was at the federal courthouse. The quotes that you see on the wall are quotes that are from oral histories that were pulled out of people's conversations with some of the women that were at the institution in the 60s and 70s. And what was so interesting is very often what they said really almost could have been applied to girls in the 20s and 30s in relation to some of the reasons they were there or how they felt or what they were saying. This is an installation around the cemetery that's still on the grounds. There is, I'm working on a visual book. There's a couple versions of it. The final one is in process, but this installation is the book is on a kind of an old, almost a student's desk, and there's a hidden MP3 player, so you can listen to oral history interviews. You can look at the book, and then these are various documents related to the project. The cottage that you see in the image is actually from the World's Fair. I forget which World's Fair it was. When one of the World's Fairs, there was a whole exhibition about the Women's House of Refuge and how it was this new innovative way to reform women. And so there's all these photographs, and it was part of that. So some of these are related to the various research. This is just a couple of spreads of the book. There's a woman named Annie Allen who was on the board of managers at the training school, and she wrote an essay called How to Save Girls Who Have Fallen. But there was this striking quote that I read that kind of starts the book, which our chief task and aim with delinquent girls is to protect them from the natural consequences of being girls. Part of what is included in the exhibition is what does incorrigible mean to you, and people kind of fill out these tags, and as much as Girls for Gender Equity and with full support from us is trying to get the word struck from the PINS petitions. I think it's really important to reclaim that word, and so there's all kinds of people that are kind of reframing it. And I'm almost done. We did a workshop with young women from a group home and an after school program in Hudson, New York, at the Hudson Opera House a few summers ago, and we called it a sociodrama girl power workshop. And sociodrama from Jael Moreno's sociometric map, because there's a psychologist or therapist who lives in Hudson and does some sociodrama and psychodrama practices. So I asked him if he would come and develop this workshop, which we did for a week, and then did a public presentation and a community conversation at the end. So these were just some of the girls would do research into, kind of recreated packets of archival documents, and then they would do further research into the girls' stories and create these theatrical vignettes around the girls' lives from the training school in relation to their own lives. And then we also did these kind of theatrical exercises under the guidance of Roy, who's the other thing, and I should have a slide in it, was that the girls, one part of what we did one day was to kind of pull out the language that was used to define girls. And then the girls wanted to create words to define themselves, in relation to that language. Let me see if I have a postcard here. I turned it into a postcard. I think it's amazing. Okay, one second. I don't know if you can see this. These are so they selected words that, again, wild, unruly, defiant, wayward, delinquent, disobedient, incorrigible, ungovernable. And then the words that they came up for themselves are free, proud, strong, survivor, imaginative, determined, courageous, free-spirited. So there's a 13-minute film about incorrigibles, and with some people talking about the history of the word and kind of what's changed or not between now and then. So with the Vera Institute of Justice in New York, we hosted a screening and then a panel and community conversation about youth justice for girls. And because Vera is working on an incredible project. It started in New York, where they wanted to end girls' incarceration in New York within 5 years. And now there's various other cities that they're working with, and they're doing an amazing job and pulling stakeholders together from all over the place, from the Department of Education and corrections, and to kind of figure out how to make it happen. But Vera really, it was great to collaborate with them, because it's so important to kind of show the long-standing history of some of this, to really put the work that they're doing now into context, and to show how important it is, because things haven't really changed in so many anyways, this is part of Kathleen took part in the conversation. And then again, whenever there's an event, you'll see we bring the girls in almost as witnesses to what's being discussed there, and to kind of bring them back and their the importance of their lives into what is happening in the current conversations. Oh, and this is one other public program that has been done is wand making workshops, which actually comes out of Liz's story, which I can either play it now or I can send you the link. So Liz was at the institution in the 70s, and in my conversation with Liz, she talked about how she never really had a childhood. She was taken by Catholic Charities all by herself and put in a foster home, which was incredibly abusive, and then the institution was abusive, and how all she wanted was to have be able to dress up like a princess and have Christmas and have kind of an imaginary life of child's life. So I made a wand for Liz with all kinds of symbols of childhood, which I wasn't able, unfortunately, to give it to her until I gave it to her partner at her funeral, because Liz has since passed away. But after that, I realized that in some cases, the wands as kind of personal storytelling devices in order to process trauma, and has been really valuable. I've done a few of them, and it's something that I don't always show because people don't always get it, but I'm sharing it with you. And I guess there's many different prongs to the project, but I'd love to kind of have a conversation, and I'm happy to play Liz's story if you'd like, but otherwise I can send you the link and you can listen to it. It's up to you.
What would people like to hear the audio? You can either type it in the message or do a reaction. How long is the audio?
The audio is about 3 minutes.
Yeah, I kind of want to hear it.
Okay.
Are people cool with that?
Let me see if I can.
Yep.
Okay.
Some positive.
If I can launch it from here, I hope I can. If not, I'll open up a different window. Okay. Okay, this is Liz.
No, I'm one of 7. I'm the baby girl. In 1968, my grandmother died. And that same year, my mother had tuberculosis. So she was hospitalized, and my father stopped coming home. So the Catholic Guardian Society stepped in and took us all and sent us all to homes. I was like 8 years old. They sent my oldest 2 sisters together. They sent the 3 boys together, but they sent me to a home all by myself. And I did not like it. So I rebelled. I kept beating people up, running away. And when I was 12 years old, the judge said I was remanded because I was an incorrigible kid. And he sent me to Hudson State Training School for Girls. And that was February 1971. They put you on a bus, off you go, upstate somewhere. We had to surrender all our clothes, and we had to wear white bras, white panties that they gave us, and a pink wraparound dress. The different cottages I know was by age. It was like a flim-flam mattress with bunk beds where you sunk in the middle. Not everybody was mean there. There was Ma Peterson, Ma Vanez. That's what we had to call her, Ma. I had Ma Perkins. I loved her. She was cool. It was a home away from home, but then, you hear rumors of one of the night staff creeping in the girls' room and doing things. there was sexual shenanigans going on with the girls experimenting. And some of the older girls would abuse the younger girls and make them do sexual acts. I don't remember anybody doing anything to me because I was crazy when I got mad. Because if you fuck with me, I'm going to try to kill you. And it made me an animal. It made me an animal that carried me through a lot of years. It was cliques, different cliques that you were with. We had to be hip, so I was slick. Slick, sly, wicked, and wide. That was the name of our group. Some of the girls were there because of unwanted pregnancies. Some of them were there because they were being sexually molested at home. We were there because nobody wanted us. So our common bond was we felt rejected. I ran away from Hudson State Training School for Girls 4 times. The furthest I got was when I ran away from the administration building. I was actually able to hitch a ride and get dropped off at the Port Authority, but I got arrested right away. At that time, I was a cutter. I was cutting my arms. I slit my own throat. Because when you feel like you're in a world where nobody loves you, you have no reason to be around. Nobody loves me? Okay, fuck all yous. And that's when I became Crazy Lizzie. It's not something I'm proud of now. I'm just letting you know the mindset. Because I could go back there in 2 minutes, how I felt. It took me a long time to understand that I'm not there anymore. But those feelings are just as real today as they were then. I have a poem that I wrote. It says, high heels and pantyhose, what does it matter? I'm 12 years old. What does it matter the things I've seen more than most at 17? What does it matter that my eyes are black? Obviously, I deserved that slap, or was it a kiss? I can't remember the cause of this. Perhaps I stood and then I fell and winded up in a grown-up hell. For sex and drugs, that's what we did. 20 years later, it matters, you see, to the child within me who is finally free.
My name is Cynthia Boykin, B-O-Y-K-I-N. I am a survivor, and I was at the training school from December 1972, and I got out of the system in November of 1973.
So there's other oral histories that I've continued to do, but Liz really wanted her story shared and she would even do workshops sometimes with young people because she really wanted them to understand what she had been through and if there's anything that her story could do to kind of help somebody else or make them feel like they're not alone, she really wanted that. So that's Liz. And Liz was, it was amazing when I went to Liz's funeral. She was in a few 12-step programs and there were hundreds of people. She had been, what do they call it in 12-step programs again when you're an advisor to somebody or
Sponsor?
Yes, a sponsor. She had been a sponsor to so many people, and she was so loved and such an inspiration. So it was really wonderful to see that when I went there.
So Monique, you wrote about a great aunt. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yes. Oh, yes. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My cousin was going through Ancestry.com and he had sent me some, what do you call them? Census?
Yes.
Not only census, he found photos, death certificates, and he said, here's something you might want to read. And I was always told about this great aunt. Everyone thought she had schizophrenia. And they told me this story. My mother told me a story. They lived on 18th and Mellon, a 3-story brownstone. They were kids. And the aunt had chased her boyfriend and around the house, out in the street with a knife. They couldn't figure out why. Then she came in the house. He got away, and she chased my mother and her 2 brothers all the way up to the 3rd floor. They were yelling out the window. The police had to come, and they took the aunt away to the institution that was located near University of Penn Hospital. It was closed in the 70s because they used to douse patients in water, mistreat them, tie them to the beds. I forget the name of the institute. It's on the death certificate. So when my cousin sent me the certificate, I was reading it, and I said, she didn't have schizophrenia. She had paralysis of the brain. And my cousin said, what is that? And I had to look it up. And it's another word for syphilis. So we put the story together. We pieced the story together, and we realized why she chased the boyfriend. He probably gave her the STD. And syphilis, when it goes untreated, and if you don't know you have it, it goes to your brain, and you become erratic. And she died at age 23. She was only in the institution for 10 days. And that doesn't mention anything about treatment. The doctor saw her the day she was admitted, which was December 21st. He didn't see her again until she died in January, which was 10 days later. So there was no interaction with her during her stay.
What institution was this?
Let me look. It's on my computer. Let me look at it. I can load it up. Oh, wait a minute. It takes me too long. I'll just read it. Wait a minute. Let me click on my computer. It's slow. Okay.
Is it called the Pennsylvania Hospital Institute?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay, yes. Here it is. It says place of death, Philadelphia. Name of hospital, Philadelphia State Hospital. It has a, wait a minute. Yeah, she was 23 years old. She entered January 20, date of death, January 21st. She was admitted December 15th. The doctor saw her on the day she was admitted. He didn't see her again until the day she died.
Yeah. So thank you, Monique. I think what we can do is if we want to just ask questions, you can either unmute yourself and ask questions straight up, or we can do the raising the hands. But I'm cool with people asking questions. I have a million, of course, but I would like other people to ask their questions if they have them. One of my questions, I'm really interested in what you do with all the research and all the materials you have. And I feel like the workshops with girls that are currently incarcerated are really powerful ideas. And I wanted to know if there are lessons that you learned about the workshops that you did that you can share, sort of the participatory stuff and what you think is really useful, and any ideas for the future.
So there's a few questions. So in terms of the research is mostly going to end up, I think, in the book, or some of it, and then some of it gets incorporated into the traveling exhibition in different ways, in different pieces. And then the oral history archive is growing and eventually will be housed at an institution for if people want to research it. I mean, one thing about Liz's story that was so interesting is she talks about her grandmother died, and then the family was kind of put into this spiral, and I realized that there were a few stories that have a grandmother dying, and then what that does to a family. It's like something that, you know, there's grandmothers that are very often this linchpin to a family, and if a grandmother dies, you know, all these things kind of can happen. Like somebody can lose a house, or it's which I hadn't realized until I started kind of doing this and trying to understand kind of what themes are running through some of the stories. So I think making the oral histories available for people, I think it's going to be important. The workshops, the workshop in Hudson was really an incredible learning experience, because I hadn't done a workshop before, and also it was a theater, more of a theatrical performance thing. But it was great that Roy was there to be able to kind of lead those exercises and things like that, and he had kind of therapeutic training. The 1 week for the workshop was too short. I mean, it was like an intensive summer thing. It was so it was every day, 5 days, and then a presentation performance on that Saturday. Way too short. But the other thing about the workshop that I realized was that I think made it successful was there was a woman named Lillian who was at the training school, who's kind of the youth liaison now on the project. So Lillian was I had called Lillian to see if she could come to the presentation on the Saturday of the work, and because she's since retired, but she was a bus driver in the Bronx, and she's like, I'm out on disability. She's like, I can't do anything. She's like, I want to take part in the workshop. So Lily came up to Hudson and was there, and I mean, it was incredible to have Lillian there and taking part of it and sharing her story, and the girls totally resonated with Lillian, and I mean, Lillian's an amazing human being too. So I think that was incredibly valuable, and there was a beautiful part of the workshop where Lily told her story, and then Roy asked everybody to recreate parts of Lillian's story as a social sculpture, like to do a freeze frame motion of a moment in Lillian's life, starting with the beginning of her story till the end. And it was incredible because people kind of went into this sculpture image one at a time. And it started with Lillian kind of it just naturally started, it kind of went from the floor to like the ceiling, and with these, and it was such an incredibly moving moment when at the end of this thing where you saw like and Lillian has since said that it was so healing. The process of that was incredible for her to be able to be part of, and not just her, I mean everyone that took part in it. Learnings there, the girls from the group home had there was somebody from the home that kind of came with them to oversee them and their participation. And it was interesting because sometimes there were different overseers or different women that were there with them, and some of they were always invited to participate, like we all participated, and in one or two cases they did, and in the other cases they didn't. But it's amazing what happens when there's somebody who's in the space that is not participating, and how it kind of changes the dynamic of things. Mm-hmm. It's a way to figure out how to deal with that better. And then, somebody asked me, is there a write-up? Could that be, could it be done like a DIY, like
a model?
And I think we'd have to do it a few more times to figure that out before there's a model. And obviously every place that it would go, it would need to be tweaked a bit. But
so just please raise your hand on the little participant thing, and I'll unmute you. But I have a couple comments, if it's okay. I don't know if you know about the Performing Statistics in Virginia. It's an incredible. Oh wait, I need to send it to everybody. I just sent it to Betsy only. That's funny. Hang on. There's Performing Statistics. It's an organization, a cultural organizing project that uses art to model, imagine, advocate for a world without youth incarceration. It's an absolutely unbelievable organization that I hope to have Mark Strandquist, who's also living in Philadelphia right now, speak about that in a future talk. And the other thing that I keep thinking about are there are two books that I've read recently is Diaz Hartman's Wayward Lives, which I feel like she intersects with your research and your project, but takes it into a much more, through her literature, she is flipping the narrative of what these girls were sentenced to, put in these institutions. You've read it, right? C.D. Hartman's Wayward Lives?
No, I haven't read it.
Okay, and Hartman, and there's a longer title, Wayward Lives. That's a really good book. And then Colson Whitehead's The Nickel Boys is another book that I just read about boys home institution in Florida. It's a fiction, but it's based on his research. And that's another book that I feel is a really related, and it just sort of broadens, oh my God, what we were doing to children. And it's throwaway people, it's like our prison system continues to use the system to throw people away. And those are my comments.
And Colson Whitehead's book is based on they're finding kind of mass graves in Florida at this boy's
right.
Right.
But yeah, right. I spelled it. I think I had autocorrect or something that happened. Does anybody have any questions for Alison on the work? Yeah, Rosemary. Let me see. There we go. Go for it, Rosemary.
Yeah, could you just repeat where the exhibit is? Perhaps maybe in the summer we'd be able to get in New York City. You said
it's in New York City at the Municipal Archives.
Municipal Archives.
Yeah. Although I don't know, it was supposed to come down in at the end of April, but I don't think that's going to happen. So I don't know how long it'll be up.
Okay.
Lori posted.
Okay.
And if anybody knows anybody in Newburgh, New York, please let me know.
Well, I know somebody in Poughkeepsie, a judge, a family court judge in Poughkeepsie. She's just retired this year. Is there? You need.
Maybe she knows somebody, because I'm looking for a venue to put for the installation in Newburgh.
Okay. All right. Yeah, she may know. Maybe you can connect after.
You can put I don't know if you feel comfortable, Alison, to put your email in the chat box.
Yeah.
Then people can follow up with you directly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Rosemary.
Alison, Cornyn.
And incorrigibles.org is where you can find the oral histories.
I'd like to ask a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
To what extent was this early in the 20th century and now a function of class? I assume it was hugely correlated. And one of the reasons I'm asking this question is when I moved to Philadelphia in 1980, I lived here for a few years then. My husband had recently died, and I had a son. And I was approached by a professor at Tyler, which is what I had moved here for, and by a neighbor. And both of them tried to encourage me to put my son either up for adoption or to send him to Girard College, which was to me an absolutely horrifying suggestion. I couldn't understand it. The professor apparently thought I could focus more on my work. I was clearly, reasonably middle class, and there was no reason to suspect that I should be giving my son away to essentially an orphanage. So as I was listening to Alison talk, I wondered if there were other examples of middle class people who had decided that getting rid of the child would maintain their class status.
I think I found that most of the girls seemed to be lower class especially in the 20s and 30s, being the immigrants, coming from immigrant families. That said, I met a woman, Ona Gritz, who's a really wonderful writer, who was writing a book about her sister who had been at the institution. And so we connected and I did an interview with her. They were a middle-class family, and her sister was just like running away and acting out, and the parents felt like they couldn't control her, and so they sent her to the institution. And maybe as a way for them to kind of, just get her out of the family. But I think even today it's it's the class definitely plays a huge role in the amount of power you have against like social systems kind of trying to take away your kids, or punitive, all kinds of punitive things that if you are of a higher class, you don't have to deal with in terms of your kids. No, so thank you for the question, Carol. I don't have a lot of other kind of story related kind of questions around that. But Ona's interview is on her oral history interview is on the website. It might be interesting for you to hear that about her sister Andra.
Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, it's interesting, Alison, because I adopted a little girl from Brazil when she was 8, and she went through probably many of the things that the young girls that went into this Hudson school, probably would have been called incorrigible, but her mother, the whole family fell apart, and she moved to the city in Sao Paulo and was living on the streets, and then ended up in a shelter, and people saw that this little girl at 5 or 4 or 5 should not be in a shelter. And she ended up, this German woman started a small orphanage for like 20 girls, and she ended up there, and that's where adopted from. Thank goodness for that German woman who still passed away. But yeah, there's lots of kids like that. We're still on the streets of Brazil, that Smith glue and stuff like that. You can see them walking around and that. But it was interesting bringing her to her family, because I had a biological son who was the same age when we adopted her. He was 8. And so I had 2 different kids. So that's why I stopped the doing photography down here, because it just, art directors need something yesterday, and you have to work till 11, 12 o'clock at night. So that's why I went into substitute teaching, because I could be home when the kids were home and stuff. So, I can kind of relate to some of these kids and what they went through and stuff, with, her behavior and stuff. But she's a functioning adult living on her own now in Philadelphia with roommates. And she always says, "Hey, Mom, Dad, you're always there for me." So it was a blessing. But she still has some ways to go, in terms of budgeting and all that. And, she's out of work now. She's a real estate person and leases things. And so we help her out, though. We're there for her still. So anyway.
What's her name? That's amazing.
Well, I prefer not to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rosemary.
Okay.
I think there's a really powerful thread that, there's so many ways to pull, to work with this subject, but the idea that the grandmothers were key to the family fabric, and when the grandmother is no longer with a family that's struggling, I hadn't thought of it in that way yet. And I think that's true in every place that I've been. I feel like that's a truism in many of the cities that I've lived in. And it's a space for storytelling.
Yeah. I think we're going to see and Alison will probably agree on that we're going to see a whole big change because of the number of older people who are the anchors in families who are somewhat dysfunctional, and they may be dying from this COVID-19. What's going to happen to those kids after this is all over?
Yeah, they're the people that are most affected.
Yeah. How long did this whole research take that you were doing with all this? You might have said it in the beginning, but I might not. I didn't pick it up.
No, I've been working on it for about 5 years.
5 years? Okay. Well, I look forward to your book. This is a wonderful exhibit, and it's fascinating.
Thank you.
That all this came together.
Anybody else have any questions?
Thoughts?
Is this going to be, there's a young woman who's a friend of my daughter's who was from Brazil. She was not adopted, but she graduated from Tyler with anthropology and photography. I tried to get her on the site, but she had said something else to do at noon. Is there a way she can log in to hear this later? You said you were videotaping or?
Yeah, Carol, are you on the OSNAP email?
That was Rosemary.
Rosemary?
Oh,
no,
Rosemary.
I got notice of this, so I must be through the photo center or something.
Okay, great. So yes, I'm going to put a recording of this on our YouTube channel, and PPAC's YouTube channel, and I'll put a link on a follow-up email next week.
Okay, great.
Okay, yeah. So we are going to put it on the YouTube channel.
Okay.
If that's okay with everybody.
Yep.
That's okay.
Cool.
Thank you so much for being here, everybody, and for letting me share what this project is all about. Good to meet you and to hear about some of your work.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah. Go ahead, Alison.
Oh, no. And Lori, thank you and the Photo Arts Center for the amazing work that you all are doing. Really. Looks like you're really linchpin in the community.
Thank you. These conversations have really, they're really important. And I'm really so grateful for this group of people that meet and talk about these things. I feel like there's a lot of there's just a lot of capacity in the people in this room, in this space, and I'm always looking for ways to utilize people's talents in the world. So I'm really excited that you all are part of this. And again, email me if you have any feedback or comments or suggestions. Because we can't see each other, and because PPAC is an organization that's really struggling, we're struggling to sort of keep things going. So I would love to hear your thoughts and any feedback that I can share as well with people, with funders, and you know what I mean, people that can help us survive this pandemic. Thank you everybody for being here, and thank you, Alison. Such a rock star.
Thank you for sharing your stories too, and how they relate. It's amazing.
Yeah. So next week, again, if you want to be part of we're going to meet at this, I think I have to send out a link for the next meeting, but we're just meeting informally and sharing pictures and checking in if people feel like they want to have that conversation every week. And then the next OSNAP is Dana Singer. Dana is just received her a Guggenheim Fellowship for her work with people living in hotels around the country. And she is the next OSNAP artist who's going to be presenting. And I think it's the third week of May, Saturday of May, same time. I'm just pulling up my calendar because I don't know it right off the top. May 16th, 10:30. And I'll be sending an email out to everybody. And I hope you can join us then. It's going to be another, well, every single OSNAP has been amazing, but it's going to be another one.
Yeah.
Oh, does anyone design web pages? The Miriam Anderson Society is seeking a web designer. Monique is trying to get a job for somebody. So please, yeah.
My picture project studio does sometimes, but when I'm not doing this other work. But I don't know if anybody out there is.
Monique is there. Should just, okay. So they should just go to the Miriam Anderson Society? Yes. Okay. All right. Let's get some work. All right, you guys stay safe. Let me know if you have any questions or any thoughts. I love hearing from you. Okay. Go well. Alison, I hope to see you soon.
Me too. Thank you.
Keep me posted on exhibitions, okay?
I will.
I'll share with the group.
And Lori, can you put me on your mailing list if I'm not on already? I don't know if I am.
Yeah, if you didn't get my email, I didn't put you on. I will definitely.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.